All right, so the horizontal bandsaw is a good tool to be able to use to cut metal for projects and different things. It's a very accurate piece of equipment. It cuts it pretty quickly and you get nice straight cuts with it. But there's a couple things that we want to show you as we cut with this stuff. So we'll go ahead and we'll get into it and we'll show you a couple things. We've got a clamp that's here. This clamp has a knob that's on the bottom. You've got to make sure that that's tight. So that way it's actually going to provide that clamping force on the back side that we want. To loosen this clamp, you simply just lift up this handle here and this thing backs out and you can loosen it. We have our handle here that we can lift up. This thing is going to automatically drop. You can kind of see that as it's going right here. We've got this hydraulic cylinder. If we tighten that lever up, it prevents that liquid from flowing and this thing stops. You cannot push down on this thing, it won't come down until you loosen that. If you push down on this, you're going to bust this tube. We've had a student do that before. Once you got your metal, you've got it marked, you can place it inside. You're going to hold down here and you're going to push that lever down. That's going to lock this thing in place. Then we're going to be good to go. We have an emergency stop there. If everything goes wrong, you can stop that, but if it's pushed in, you can twist that and you can get that unlocked. Once everything's set up, you can simply turn that button on and we're going to loosen that lever down. Typically, depending on the thickness of metal, how big that material is, you're going to adjust that thing to different numbers. There are numbers on there. I adjust it to about 3 normally on what we do. It works pretty good, but it just basically sets how slowly this thing's going to draw. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start that up and we'll test the draw. I like to drop it quick at first and then get it once it gets close, then I kind of lower it back down and slow down that drop. So we've got that 3 that's set up right there. That's going to be pretty good for what we want to do. You can set this thing and you can kind of forget about it, except you don't want to walk away from it. You definitely want to make sure you sit right by it in case something does go wrong. Because the machine handles cutting itself. Once you get it set up, the drop rate and all that, everything is going to be perfect, everything's going to be good. And all we got to do is just kind of sit here, wait for this machine to actually finish it out. What you're going to notice is that this little bar right here and that little nut, when that hits down on the bottom, it's going to lift this up and it's going to flip that switch on and it's going to shut this machine off. What you don't want to do when you adjust this clamp is put this thing underneath that. It's going to stop this blade prematurely. It's not going to cut through your metal and you're going to run into some issues. If you wanted to make a angled cut, we have a little gauge right here. Bring you guys in. So this little gauge is going to allow us to make angled cuts. So if you want to do 45s, if you want to do a 15, a 10 degree, we can do those angled cuts. The way we do that is we simply take this handle here. We're going to loosen that up. You can pull this thing out. It's not moving that bolt at all. It's got like a spring action in it. And you can loosen it a little bit more. I like to lift this thing up and then you can make the turn however you want. I typically like to go in this direction just because that clamping mechanism, it won't get in the way. And right where this little tip is at is going to be our angle. So right there we've got to set it up. That's going to be a 30-degree angle. You cut it in really the same exact way. It allows us to make those angled cuts. as necessary. We're going to set this thing back down to 0. To tighten it up, twist it, pull that handle out, push it back, and then just tighten it back. So the drill press is much like a handheld drill, except we've got a bunch of stationary stuff. And with this one, we've actually got some kind of nicer kind of setups to be able to adjust and to be able to get these things drilled. One, we already know how do we center punch. We've shown you that. So we've got our little center punch mark right there. What we're going to do is we're going to clamp this in this vise. Okay, and this is kind of a special vise. It's not necessarily a drill press vise, but it works really well for what we want to do and what we want to drill through. One thing I always like to do is just take a piece of scrap wood. You can see this one's been drilled through a handful of times before. And I'd like to set my metal on top of that. That way I'm not drilling into this vise. It's important that we don't do that. These vices are expensive and we want to make sure we take care of them. This vise is clamped down. It's nice and secured to our table here. So what we can do is we can just loosen that vise up there. We can place this thing on the inside and then we can simply just clamp this material down. Now, we got to get our drill bit in. We've got our chuck. So what we're going to do is we're going to place our drill bit in there. We've got our chuck key. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this chuck key and I'm going to tighten this thing down. I like to go in a couple different spots, at least 2 of the 3, to just make sure that it's nice, secured, and everything is great. Now we're kind of missed our mark a little bit, and so typically what we do is we loosen it up. We'd maybe take that clamp, we'd kind of tighten those things up, but in this case, we don't actually need to do that because this vise will actually allow us to adjust this and kind of fine tune exactly where we want this point at. So what we're going to do is we're going to do that right now. We're going to adjust this thing up and we can adjust it over. And we're just waiting for this thing to kind of be right in that center there. When we're drilling through metal, if it's thicker than 1/8 of an inch, we want to have some oil, so we're going to apply a light film of oil right there. We've got our emergency stop, we've got our forward, reverse, and we've got our stop switch right there. So we're going to click forward on this thing. Now this drill, what we can do is we can actually pull this thing down and feed this manually, or we can lock it in place like there, and you can see this thing is feeding it down automatically. Depends on what we're doing, what we want to do. Slight easy pressure here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to lock that in place. I'm going to show you what the auto feature looks like. And hopefully you can see those ribbons that are starting to form. That's a sign of a good sharp drill bit. That's a sign of good even pressure. That's really what you want to see. Once you see it kind of break through, you start seeing that wood come through. That's an indication that you've got this thing all the way through. We don't have to worry about drilling into our vise there. Obviously you got some oil that will need to be cleaned off, but there you can see we've got a nice hole right there. We're going to go ahead and do another one. We're going to manually feed this time. So we'll do another center punch mark. And what we're going to do, we're going to clamp this thing down again. We're going to feed this thing down. We're going to have to readjust this because I did not measure. I did not try to put this in a specific spot, which is actually good because it demonstrates how we can get these things situated and lined up. Once it doesn't pull that bit, we're good to go. Add a little bit of oil. Doesn't take a whole lot. If this is real thick, I may add more. And not using the auto feature, I'm just going to kind of slightly push down on this. You're going to see we've got a ribbon that's starting to form there. That's exactly what we want to see. You can ease up on that pressure. Sometimes let that thing kind of break away. Doesn't take a whole lot though for this. It's pretty easy. Little push. Good sharp drill bit is going to get us nice, easy holes. Take a file. We can clean that stuff up. So now that we have our hole drilled for our threads, we're going to clamp this in the machine vise like that. Now, with this tap, this is a 3/8 inch national course tap, but we need to drill a 5/16 inch hole. And so that's what we've done. We have drilled a 5/16 inch hole because that hole has to be smaller than the threads that we have on the outside here, okay? So we want to hog out a lot of that material, but we want to leave some for these threads to kind of cut. So that's where this tap comes in handy, because we've got these threads that we can actually cut and we can put a bolt through. We've got a tap right here, and then we've got the tap handle. You'll notice that the tap has a kind of square end or a diamond end, and this thing also kind of has that same end. Essentially what we do is we just slip that thing in there. We don't want to go down on that rounded part, and we just twist the handles right there to lock them together. That's going to kind of hold that thing in place. It's not super strong. Sometimes it may fall out, but what it's going to do is it's going to prevent it from spinning, and that's ultimately what we're looking for. You want to add a little bit of oil. There we go. A little bit of oil. Get it over in that spot. And then to start this, all we're going to do is essentially just keep this thing square. We got to make sure we keep it square. We don't want to kind of have this thing tilted at an angle. We're going to have a slight pressure downwards, and we're going to start to twist this. Notice how it kind of stays in place. It's starting to kind of grab. Slight pressure downwards, and we're just twisting to get these threads to start to cut. Once these threads are cut, you can back these things out to break the chips that are formed, and then go a little bit further, break those chips out. Okay, so you go forward and you back up to break those chips out. If this is a real thick piece, we might need to add more oil. On this one, it's pretty thin. We're probably okay. So we go forward a little bit, we break those chips out. Go forward, and then go back to break those chips out. Once this thing spins freely, you can see right here, see how that starts to spin now? That's how we know we've got it all the way cut. Those threads are there, and we have now cut threads into this metal. We can take that off. We can twist that thing by hand. We can grab our little rag. And we've got our threads that are on the inside. Now the next thing that we've got to do is we've got to make the bolt. Now to get this piece of round stock threaded, I need to kind of clamp it in a vise. But the problem with this stuff is our vices is just going to allow this thing to spin. It's going to take a lot of force to be able to cut this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend a little L angle into this for our battery terminal rollers that we typically make. So we're going to kind of lock that piece down, and then what we're going to do is we're going to pull this thing. Try to get a 90 if we can. So all by hand, we're able to bend that. You can see we've got a nice 90 degree. That's going to help clamp this thing in there. And then we're just going to make some threads right along that side right there. So the die and the die stock is what holds the die in place. It's the same thing, except this one's going to cut on the outside instead of the inside of a hole. Now you'll notice these things look like they're ground down right there. And they're designed to be that way, to help guide and start the cutting process. If we flip this around, you can see the other end, we have nice sharp edges on that end. That's what's going to kind of actually get the cut. So it's going to gradually start to cut this. Same process as before. You want a little bit of oil. You may notice on here that this thing's tapered. You can file those down and create a little bit of a taper to help make this a little bit easier to start. Make sure we lock that down to keep that from spinning. In fact, maybe I'll show you this right here. So this, see that little bump right there? This inside piece has like a little piece that goes in, and it locks that in place, and it keeps this from spinning. Some of them are like a hexagon This one's round, but it's got that little locking bar there. So we got some oil, same process as before. We want to kind of hold this thing, a little bit of downward pressure. You're going to twist this. You're going to start to feel it grab. So a little bit of downward pressure. Once it starts grabbing, then we're going to repeat that same process going forward, backing it up. You can see those chips coming down and fraying up those cutting blades. On this one, we may add a little bit more oil just because it's a bigger cut. Help extend the life of the blades. You feel that oil making it slide, making it cut a little bit easier. However far down you want to go to be able to thread is up to you. We can spin that off. Clean off that oil there. This is going to be warm. We do have metal on metal contact, but if we take our plate, we should be able to thread these things together. And you can see those threads go in there. You can see they're pretty clear. It's really smooth. Okay, so that's using a tap and die system to be able to create threads and make your own bolts.